Today is day 32 of my GMAT preparation. I am trying to score a 99 percentile score on the GMAT for a second time, even though the test format and scoring methodology have undergone significant changes since I last scored in the 99th percentile on the GMAT several years back. That score from the past had helped me get into Columbia Business School for an MBA. The question this time around is whether I can equal or beat that score with certainty and confidence given all the challenges that stand in the way. My plan for today's study session looks roughly similar to the plan I had for yesterday's study session. I will pick up one practice set each for the quant section, for the data sufficiency question type from the data insight section, and the reading comprehension question type from the verbal section. The focus of this video will be on reading comprehension questions because I have already shared plenty of content on quant and data sufficiency questions previously. So before I get into my practice set for today, I want you to begin thinking about a specific nuance that pertains to the reading comprehension question type on the GMAT. In yesterday's video, I told you about the sequence in which I read through different parts of a reading comprehension question. I find it most optimal to read the question first, the passage second, and the answer options last. Based on my experience with the people whom I have helped prepare for the GMAT, that has mostly been true. That said, you should keep an open mind and experiment with different sequences to figure out what works best for you. Coming to today, I want you to think about the passage component of a reading comprehension question. Let's say you have a passage with 3 paragraphs on a reading comprehension question. You are clicking through the verbal section of the GMAT and this is the first time you run into this passage. Once you start reading the passage for the first time, how do you think you should distribute your time, attention, and energy across the 3 paragraphs of the passage? Should one of them get a higher investment versus the others? I will answer that question somewhere in today's video, but first, let me get into my practice set. Alright, so that was about 125 minutes in total. I spent a total of 60 minutes on a quant practice set, followed by 65 minutes on a data sufficiency practice set. Talking about the quant practice set first, I spent 45 of those 60 minutes solving through 23 questions. I was able to answer all of them correctly, even though I did struggle a little bit on a counting question somewhere. Another 15 minutes were spent on analysis and checking answers. I also struggled on a counting question yesterday. If you have been following my prep, you know that counting has been an area of weakness for me right from day 1 of my GMAT preparation. So what I did today after I was done with the practice set is spent a minute or two revisiting the question that I struggled with yesterday and answering that once again. That actually helped me revisit some concepts and clarify an idea which I was struggling with earlier. In particular, I was struggling with identifying when using the multiplication rule results in double counting versus when it doesn't. Now that is a critical point which can easily lead to mistakes on counting questions. So I will cover that in greater depth in some other video. I'm mentioning it just so you can also start thinking about how and when the multiplication rule should or should not be used to count something. Besides that, there was one particular question from today's practice set which I actually enjoyed quite a bit. I enjoyed it because it took me quite a long time to solve. It was question number 12 from the practice set today, and as you can see, it took me 6 minutes to get through. However, during performance analysis, I realized that this was one of those rare cases where the official guide had a solution which was much more elegant than what I could come up with. At this point of time, it is very rare for me to learn something completely new with the quant section. So when that does happen, I actually feel genuinely happy about it. Let's talk about the data sufficiency practice set next. On this one, I took 45 minutes to solve 20 questions. Once again, I was able to answer all of them correctly. A couple quick callouts on data sufficiency. Generally, I always recommend that you read through GMAT's official solutions to questions that you were able to answer correctly on your own. Depending on how good your fundamentals are on a given section, that might help you find ways in which you can answer questions faster or more accurately. However, with the data sufficiency section, I have noticed a pattern that most official GMAT solutions will use substitution to demonstrate the answer. Just as with quant questions, my opinion is that on data sufficiency questions as well, substitution should be a method of last resort. You've heard me say this a dozen times if you have been following my videos for a while. In case of data sufficiency questions, the official guide often use substitution to demonstrate the solution to you. Remember that the official guide's intention is not to coach you, but just to showcase why a particular answer option is incorrect. So don't take the use of substitution in the solutions to data sufficiency questions in the official guide too seriously. Otherwise, you will just end up spinning your wheels, waste your time on these questions, and not see any improvement whatsoever. With that said, time for me to get into a reading comprehension practice set. Alright, so that was another 75 minutes. I spent 43 minutes solving 21 questions and about 30 minutes reviewing my answers and then reading through the solutions to the questions which I was able to answer correctly. Actually, I also read through solutions of certain questions I answered incorrectly because I just couldn't figure out how I would answer them any differently even on a reattempt. Talking about accuracy, I got completely destroyed on this practice set. Out of the 21 questions I attempted, I was only able to answer 16 questions correctly. To be fair, my practice set consisted of 16 hard difficulty questions and only 5 medium difficulty questions. Yes, there were no easy questions on this practice set. If you think this was a deliberate choice, no, it wasn't. To me, this is just demonstrating one of the many quirks of the online question bank. Moving on, if you've seen my last video where I also attempted a reading comprehension practice set, you know that my accuracy on that practice set was 100%. Just to have a benchmark, I compared the two practice sets. The practice set from yesterday had 15 medium difficulty questions and 7 hard difficulty questions. So clearly it is the hard questions that are getting me on the reading comprehension question type. In fact, all the 6 questions which I answered incorrectly today were rated as hard questions. Let's talk about what happened. As you've already seen, I had finished with my practice sets for the Quant and Data Insight section before I got to the verbal practice set for today. Because my accuracy on the Quant and Data Sufficiency practice sets was at 100%, I was feeling very excited. So excited, in fact, that I became careless with the first few questions that I attempted on the reading comprehension practice set. This is actually one of the hidden dangers of the GMAT. If you think you're doing too well on the test and you start getting excited, you run the risk of losing touch with self-awareness and walking into GMAT traps with your eyes closed. One of the most important and hidden principles for you to do well on the GMAT is to regulate your emotions. This principle is not specific to one section of the GMAT but is relevant to the entire test. In case you haven't noticed, I am already at a point in my GMAT preparation where I've started solving questions from all 3 sections of the test in a single study session or at least within the same day. So I am getting closer and closer to the final test format, and this is the time where I need to start paying attention to some of these things. In summary, that excitement was responsible for 2 of my errors right at the beginning of the reading comprehension practice set. As you can see on the screen, I answered both question 1 and question 2 incorrectly. Moving on from there, the next question which I answered incorrectly was question number 10. This was a miss resulting from what I like to call cognitive overwhelm. Without giving away the passage or the question, all I can say is that the passage corresponding to this question was a little too convoluted for me to make sense of it all and retain all the key parts cleanly. As a result, I ended up forgetting which sentences from the passage I should be referring to be able to fully answer this question. Effectively, I ended up answering this question with partial information, and that's why I answered it wrong. Moving on comes question 12. Here the reason for my error is very different and has very high learning value for me. My mistake here was not paying sufficient attention when reading through some of the answer options, which looked incorrect on the surface. Unfortunately, one of the options that I did not pay enough attention to was the right answer. I ended up eliminating it prematurely and never reading it again. So this is a reminder. Your job on reading comprehension questions is not just to read and synthesize the passage. You also need to be attentive to the wording of the question and the wording of the answer options, and synthesize all of that properly before you start making judgments on which answer option to pick. Finally, come question 14 and question 16. Both these questions corresponded to the same passage, which was on the topic of marine and botanical sciences. This was actually the hardest passage to read on today's practice set. I don't think I understood the passage fully, so I'm not surprised that I got 2 out of the 3 questions wrong against this passage. No excuses to be made there. I have bookmarked this passage and these questions, and I will reattempt them in the coming days at some point. Alright, so that is all on the practice sets for today. Let me conclude by sharing my thoughts on the question that I had posed to you at the start of this video. I will answer it in the form of an accuracy principle that I use on reading comprehension questions. The principle is simple. invest the most upfront. Usually on most reading comprehension passages, the first sentence and or the first paragraph usually lay out the most clear hints about the subject matter of the passage. If you synthesize and understand the subject matter of the passage properly, it will make it easier for you to add information from the rest of the passage to that initial synthesis. The challenge is that very often that first sentence or that first paragraph will also be the most convoluted part of a reading comprehension passage. Think of it as the GMAT's way of testing your intellectual resilience. The test is trying to check if you give up easily, so make sure you don't. Persist. Break the sentence or paragraph down into smaller pieces of information and consume it one part at a time if needed. Ensure that the content is synthesized in your head before you move on to the rest of the passage. It doesn't have to be a perfect synthesis as long as you are able to grasp what the subject matter of the passage is going to be about. Alright, so that is all for today. Hit like, subscribe and bell. Put a comment about how the GMAT loves flirting with you by occasionally presenting you with easy questions, only to break your heart with a series of hard questions right after that. Click on the Ask Me Anything link if you have any questions for me. Just remember not to ask me questions about how to get over heartbreak. Keep those questions for that other YouTuber who claims to know everything about the gender that they are not. All the best for your GMAT prep. I will catch you in the next video.